to us here from Dr. Yan Yan over on X, who says, here you go, you'll still have to be patient, but this is what you might get. It's named Celsius, posting it as of now so that you guys don't go crazy. Just wait and see how usable it is, if at all, and it should work up to 13.04 on the PS4 and 12.70 on the PS5. The Earth hung in saying there is a bug discovered by ballers by diffing the PS4 kernels in the FFS mount function, which is an integer overflow that causes a heap overflow. It might be exploitable, but who knows, works up to 12.70 in theory, and 13.04 for the PS4 in theory. Then Dr. Yan Yan goes on to say it was patched in 13.50 on the PS4 and 13.0 on the PS5. No guarantee that it will work out, or if it does, that it will even be usable. And it is not getting as private exploits. It also requires a USB 3.0 drive of 250 gigabytes or above to trigger via extended storage. And of course, 250 gigabyte drives, they need to actually have the full 250 gigabytes of space available. Some 250 gigabyte drives are advertised as 250 gigs, but they might be slightly below that and will not work. So it seems like a larger drive would be recommended, but it's not recommended to go out and try and get one of these drives yet, because we don't know yet if this will even be turned into a usable exploit or not. It's still early days. He also says the expected userland exploits that you would use to run this would be the PlayStation View application and the Blu-ray jailbreak for PS4, and for PS5 it would be the YouTube jailbreak and also the Blu-ray jailbreak as well. He says, obviously, yeah, it doesn't take 50 minutes to run, but it does require plugging in the USB drive at the correct time, so its success will depend on timing. It does seem quite reminiscent of the exFAT hack on the PS4 for 9.0, where you plug in a USB drive to trigger the kernel exploit. Seems like it is something similar here, but you might just have to, wait a certain number of seconds before plugging in the USB drive, which could make it quite difficult to make this exploit consistent, requiring on precise timing on when you need to plug in the USB drive, especially if the timing might differ depending on your console or something like that. So if it does get turned into a full kernel exploit for the PS5, even though it does not support a higher firmware, it would allow you to jailbreak faster than having to wait 50 minutes, which is the advantage of getting a new kernel exploit even for existing jailbreakable firmwares on the PS5. And then on the PS4, it would work on higher firmwares currently. We can only jailbreak the PS4 up to 13.0. This would allow us to go up to 13.04, which would also, of course, include 13.02 as well. So I don't want to overhype this right now because there's still two things that need to be established. Can this vulnerability actually be turned into an exploit? And can that exploit then be triggered with a certain level of consistency where it can then be actually a viable exploit for people to use? Those are still the questions that need to be answered right now. That's the only topic I have right now that applies to PlayStation 4. Everything else is PS5 related. So anyway, that's what we've got there. So moving on from that, we also got this Fulu bounty for the PlayStation 5, which is pretty interesting. The bounty pot is now up to $27,000, which basically means if you're a hacker who has some kind of hypervisor exploit for the PS5 that works up to the latest firmwares, you could potentially claim this bounty. So the reason why this has been posted is obviously after all of the anti-consumer moves that PlayStation's been making recently, and Fulu is a consumer rights/advocacy organization. I believe it is funded or backed by Louis Rothman. He may also be a founding member who has a massive YouTube channel who's also been promoting this. So what they're looking for here is for someone to give the current PlayStation 5 users real ownership over their own hardware. The bounty can be won by any eligible person who makes a hardware, software, or combined modification or method to any model of PlayStation 5 that meets the following criteria. It must demonstrably allow the modification or bypassing of the PS5 hypervisor to the extent that an alternative operating system can be booted. The alternative operating system is not required to be stable, and it must either be a one-off implementation or an implementation that takes no more than 10 minutes to execute if it needs to be repeated. So number 50-minute plus patience to jailbreaks would qualify here. And it must work on the latest PS5 firmware version, which is 13.42, or any newer firmware version that comes out. The alternative operating system must be able to access the PS5's primary computation memory and graphics hardware, and the PS5 must be able to boot into its original operating system with the capacity to still play PS5 games, and also any hardware modification must be able to be carried out by somebody who only has basic soldering skills and equipment. And there's also been an update saying that we wish to make it clear that the bounty will not be paid out to any individual who uses their solution to participate in Sony's bug bounty program, This was one of the kind of contentious things when this first launched, is that it first launched at a $10,000 reward, and of course, they're looking for a hypervisor plus kernel exploit chain when you could go through PlayStation's HackerOne bug bounty program, and they will pay out a lot more for a kernel plus hypervisor exploit. They pay out around $10,000 for just the kernel vulnerability, but that shouldn't be as much of an issue now that the bounty has increased to over 27K, and something that's potential hackers in the scene might consider claiming this bounty rather than going through PlayStation's bug bounty program, especially with all the anti-consumer moves that PlayStation's been making recently. Now, there was a little bit of controversy that this potential bounty could be submitted privately and the exploit would not get made public, but I don't really see that happening when this specifically talks about allowing users to get full control ownership over their own hardware, which is what Fulu is looking for here. So I'm pretty sure it would get released publicly. So next, we've got Gejimia YouTube Jailbreak getting updated to support 13.40 and 13.42. So a new compatible YouTube application has been added, which is version 01.009.253, which is the latest version of the YouTube application for the PS5 that is now supported. But obviously, this is just the userland exploit. So just userland code execution, no kernel exploit. So it's not like we can jailbreak on 13.40 or 13.42, but it is getting the YouTube jailbreak ready to the point where it could be chained with any future kernel exploits that come out on those higher firmwares for the PS5. And we also got its PLK's autoloader version of the YouTube jailbreak, also including the same change. So that's been updated there as well, as you can see at YouTube version 01.009.253 with minimum firmware 13.40, obviously also working on 13.42. Next, we have the release of PlayStation 5 emulators that can run on the PC. We have PS5, a PlayStation 5 emulator for Windows, and of course we also got Sharp EMU, an experimental PlayStation 5 emulator for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So both of these emulators are in development. It seems that PS5 was originally a closed source kind of proprietary emulator, but it's now become open source. And we have a new version that has been released pretty recently. We also have recent releases of Sharp EMU as well. So that has also got a recent release 15 hours ago. So yeah, these emulators are improving pretty quickly. Originally, it was just 2D games that were playable. I have a full video showing the setup of PS5 and me running some PlayStation 5 games on there. I'll leave that video linked in the description. No PlayStation 5 games are really considered playable in these emulators yet. This is still kind of the early developmental phase, but, we have got games that can actually boot in-game, and also have games that are able to boot into the menus. There's a 3D Pac-Man game that's now actually bootable in-game. GTA 5 is able to boot as far as getting into the menus in PS5. We also have Sharp EMU that's able to get past the loading screen for Demon's Souls and get to the point where it gets technically not really in-game. It gets to kind of the intro cinematic, but the frame rate goes down to like 0.4 frames per second. So that's as far as I'm able to get Demon's Souls. And Astrobot's able to get into the loading screen, and somebody was actually able to get it further into the actual Sony PlayStation intro cinematic. I did get quite a few comments under my video saying who cares when most PlayStation 5 games are playable on PC anyway, but PlayStation has announced that they're not going to be releasing PlayStation exclusives on PC anymore. So these emulators are definitely going to become more useful into the future once they're fully fleshed out and they're in a position where they're able to actually play PS5 games fully start to finish. So obviously there's still probably quite a while to go before we get to that point, but this is the early stage and it's good to see that these emulators are making some progress here. So moving on from that, we also got an update to the payload manager, so it's now been updated to version 0.3.3. We have the cloud repository search and sort feature that's been added, so you can update from a previous version of the payload manager just by using the payload manager itself. So if you have an internet connection on your PS5 with Nano DNS running, you can go into the Manage Payload section, go to the cloud repository, and you'll see the payload manager in there if there's a new version available from the version that you're running, and then you can simply hit install, it will install it, and then it will not appear in the dashboard section, but when you next load the jailbreak again and it loads the payload manager, it will load the new updated version 0.3.3, and that will then be available. So in there you will find things like custom payload categories that's been added, the repository search and sort feature, so inside the Manage Payload section, You can now sort things by update time, so you can see from top to bottom the payloads will be listed in the order in which they were most recently updated, as well as being able to filter search for a specific payload so that you can find it more easily. We also have the Media app category, so the Payload Manager shortcuts on the homepage has now been moved into the Media section. So if you install the Payload Manager for the first time, the shortcut will now be in the Media tab instead of in the Game tab. And the repository version display, when a custom repository explicitly defines a version, the front end now displays it instead of trying to guess it from the file name. So that's been added along with a bunch of back-end improvements and bug fixes that have been added in this version. There's also been a lot of updates to Shadow Mount Plus. There's a new alpha release, lots of different alpha versions that have been coming out recently. They're still considered unstable. They're test versions right now, so I wouldn't recommend using these primarily until there's a full release. But you can see here, this latest version here added an optional persistent image mounting between game launches, reduced scanner file descriptor usage, added detailed fatal signal reports or track games, improved USB game recovery after suspend and resume, and added seamless switching between mounted games, and added localized notification for 30 different languages with automatic console language detection and manual selection via language. So what we've also seen here is new variables that have been added, like the auto-remove missing games, so that if you delete a game from the Homebrew folder, say in the data folder, or you have your games on a USB drive and you unplug that USB drive, then after about 5 minutes, it will automatically remove the shortcuts on the homepage for those games, since you won't be able to launch them anyway. If you've deleted the file that they're linked to, you don't have to manually delete the shortcuts separately. It will delete them automatically, which is pretty nice. There was also an update to the dump installer to version 1.7 beta, which just adds a install fix. We also have a new build of the Garlic Save Manager, which fixes a save corruption bug, and also Victorious X has released yet another version of the all-in-one Blu-ray Jailbreak ISO, which contains a bunch of additional features, automatic firmware detection, pipeline categories, so it now has Proopsploit and UMTX. On firmware 7.61, you can choose whether you want to use the Coopsploit or the UMTX kernel exploit. You've also got Run the Last Selected Pipeline button. You can quickly just run the last selected option that you loaded previously. You also have new icon groups. You've got Payload Manager pipelines added, so you have the option to run the jailbreak with the Poopsploiter UNTX and then load the Payload Manager, as well as adding firmware and ISO version displayed to the menu in the top right-hand corner, an option to delete the cache, and also removing the backport payload since it's built into Shadow Map Plus anyway. So that's what you've got available there with the latest version of the Blu-ray Jailbreak from Victorious X. So anyway, that's going to basically do it here for this one. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found